The night was darker than usual, as though the moon had decided to hide behind the thick veil of clouds. The streetlights on the narrow road flickered faintly, offering no comfort to Zaid, who was driving home after a late meeting. The road he had taken was one he usually avoided, an old, abandoned route that ran through the outskirts of the city. It was said to be cursed, but Zaid dismissed the stories as mere rumors. The tires of his car crunched on the uneven gravel, the sound echoing in the stillness. The silence around him felt unnatural, as though the road was holding its breath, waiting for something. Zaid tried to shake off the uneasiness creeping up his spine, turning the radio on to fill the void. Static. He adjusted the dial. Still static. Strange. The radio had worked perfectly fine earlier. As he drove further, the trees lining the road grew denser, their twisted branches casting long, eerie shadows. Zaid felt a strange pressure in his chest, an instinctive warning that something wasn't right. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 12:47 a.m. Suddenly, the car jolted violently as though it had hit something. Zaid slammed the brakes and cursed under his breath. His heart pounded as he stepped out to inspect. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but there was nothing there, no animal, no pothole, nothing that could have caused the jolt. A chill ran down his spine when he noticed the air had grown colder, and the usual night sounds, crickets, the rustling of leaves, were absent. The silence was deafening. Just as he was about to get back into the car, he heard it, a low, guttural growl. Zaid froze. The growl grew louder, coming from the shadows to his left. Slowly, he turned his head, his breath caught in his throat. There, standing at the edge of the road, was a dog unlike any he had ever seen. It was massive, its dark fur matted and patchy, revealing scars across its muscular frame. Its eyes glowed a haunting shade of red, and its teeth, long, sharp, and glistening, were bared as drool dripped onto the ground. The dog stood motionless, staring directly at him, its growl reverberating through the night like a warning. Zaid's legs felt rooted to the spot. He wanted to run, but his body betrayed him. The dog took a slow, deliberate step forward, its claws scraping against the gravel. Then it stopped, tilting its head slightly as if studying him. Zaid's mind raced. Was it going to attack? Why was it here? And why did it feel like this wasn't an ordinary dog? As Zaid struggled to think, the dog suddenly let out a blood-curdling howl that echoed across the empty road, sending a shockwave of terror through him. He stumbled back towards his car, fumbling with the door handle. The dog, still standing in the same spot, watched him with an eerie stillness that was somehow more terrifying than if it had charged. Just as Zaid got into the car and locked the doors, the growling stopped. He looked through the windshield and saw nothing. The dog had vanished. But the silence didn't bring him relief. Instead, it felt heavier, as if the air itself was warning him, this isn't over. Zaid's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. The road ahead was empty, but the memory of the dog's glowing red eyes burned in his mind. He pressed the ignition, and the engine roared to life. "Just get home," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. The car sped down the narrow road, its headlights cutting through the suffocating darkness. For a moment, he felt a flicker of relief. The dog was gone. Maybe it was just his imagination, a trick played by his overtired mind. But deep down, he knew better. That thing wasn't just a stray dog, it was something else, something unnatural. As he rounded a bend, a loud thud jolted the car. The steering wheel wrenched in his hands, and the vehicle skidded slightly. "Not again," he muttered, his pulse racing. He looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road behind him stretched into the void, but Zaid could feel it. A presence. Before he could process the thought, he heard it again, a low, guttural growl. This time, it was louder, closer. Zaid's eyes darted to the side mirror, and his heart nearly stopped. The dog was running alongside the car. Its massive body moved with an unnatural speed, its claws scraping against the asphalt. Its red eyes glared into the car, as though daring him to go faster. Drool flew from its open maw, and its growls grew into a terrifying snarl. Panic surged through Zaid. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the car lurching forward. The speedometer climbed, 50, 60, 70. But the dog didn't slow down. If anything, it seemed to relish the chase, its monstrous form keeping pace with ease. "Leave me alone," Zaid shouted, his voice cracking. The road ahead was a blur of shadows and faintly flickering lights. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the wheel, desperately trying to outrun the creature. But the dog wasn't just chasing him, it was playing with him, veering to the side and then darting back toward the car, its claws scraping against the metal with a sickening screech. Zaid's mind raced. He couldn't keep going like this. The road stretched endlessly, with no signs of civilization in sight. He had to think of something. Then he remembered the stories. The cursed road. The warnings about strange disappearances and unexplainable events. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory, warning him as a child, never stop on that road. And if you ever encounter the hound, don't look into its eyes. But it was too late for that. The car hit a pothole, and Zaid struggled to regain control. The dog seized the moment, leaping toward the car. Its massive body slammed against the side, causing the vehicle to swerve violently. Zaid screamed, his heart pounding in his ears. He saw a faint glimmer ahead, an intersection. Salvation? Maybe. Without thinking, he yanked the wheel, taking the left turn. The tires screeched, and for a moment, the dog disappeared from view. Zaid's chest heaved as he gulped in air, his fingers shaking. But the relief was short-lived. The growl returned, deeper and more menacing than before. Zaid glanced in the rearview mirror, and his blood turned to ice. The dog was standing in the middle of the road behind him, its glowing eyes locked onto his. It wasn't chasing him anymore. It was waiting. And then, as if the darkness itself swallowed it whole, the dog vanished. Zaid slowed the car, his mind a chaotic mess. His instincts screamed at him to keep driving, but his curiosity, his cursed, relentless curiosity, made him stop. He rolled down the window slightly, peering into the inky blackness. The silence was deafening, the air heavy with an ominous stillness. "Is it gone?" he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. Before he could think further, the car shook violently, as though something massive had landed on it. The roof creaked under the weight. Zaid's breath hitched. A low, rumbling growl filled the air, this time right above him. His blood ran cold as a single claw scraped slowly, deliberately, down the windshield. Zaid's chest tightened as he sat frozen in the driver's seat, every nerve in his body screaming at him to move. The claw slid down the windshield with a slow, deliberate screech, leaving a jagged mark that glinted faintly in the dim light. He didn't dare look up. The growl from the roof deepened, reverberating through the car like a sinister warning. The metal groaned under the weight of the beast, and Zaid swore he could hear the sound of its labored breathing, hot and heavy, as if it were savoring his fear. Zaid's trembling hand reached for the ignition. His instincts told him to floor the gas pedal, but his mind screamed caution. What if it was waiting for him to make a mistake? Suddenly, the growl stopped. The oppressive silence was worse. It pressed down on him, making the air in the car feel thick and suffocating. His pulse thundered in his ears as he strained to listen, his eyes darting around for any sign of movement. Tap. Tap. Something rapped against the driver's side window. Zaid's head snapped to the side, and he saw it. The dog's face. Its massive head tilted, red eyes burning with an almost human-like malice. Drool dripped from its exposed fangs, its lips curling into a snarl that was more a mockery of a grin. But it wasn't the sight of the beast that terrified Zaid the most, it was its eyes. In those crimson orbs, he saw flashes of something impossible. Memories. Not his own, but of others who had traveled this road, who had stopped, who had been foolish enough to meet its gaze. And all of them had met the same fate. No, Zaid whispered, his voice cracking. I won't let it take me. The dog's head snapped back abruptly, disappearing from the window. A second later, the car rocked violently as the beast leapt off the roof, its claws scraping loudly as it hit the ground. Zaid saw his chance. He twisted the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. Slamming his foot on the gas, he sped down the road, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The dog didn't follow. Not at first. The road ahead seemed endless, the trees on either side looming like dark sentinels. But something was wrong. No matter how fast he drove, the scenery never changed. The same gnarled branches. The same shadows. It was as if the road itself was holding him hostage. And then he heard it. The howl. It started low, almost mournful, but quickly rose into a bone-chilling crescendo that echoed through the night. Zaid glanced in the rearview mirror, and his heart sank. The dog was back. But it wasn't alone. Shapes emerged from the shadows, dozens of them. They weren't dogs, not entirely. Their grotesque forms were twisted, their glowing eyes fixed on Zaid's car as they moved with a horrifying grace, their limbs contorted in ways that defied nature. No, no, no! Zaid shouted, slamming the accelerator to the floor. The car lurched forward, its engine whining in protest. The creatures gave chase, their collective growls merging into a deafening roar. They moved as one, a tide of darkness surging toward him, their claws tearing into the asphalt. The headlights flickered, and for a terrifying moment, Zaid was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the road ahead had changed. A figure stood in the middle of the lane. Zaid barely had time to react. He wrenched the wheel to the side, the car skidding off the road and into the trees. The impact was jarring, the sound of metal crunching against wood echoing through the night. Silence. Zaid groaned, his head throbbing as he struggled to lift it. The car was tilted at an awkward angle, its front end buried in a ditch. The windshield was cracked, the engine hissing. And then he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the gravel. Zaid turned his head, his heart pounding as the figure approached. It was tall, its form cloaked in shadows, but he could see its eyes, red and piercing, just like the dog's. As it drew closer, Zaid realized with growing horror that it wasn't entirely human. Its movements were too smooth, its presence too unnatural. Why? Zaid croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? The figure stopped just a few feet away, its head tilting as though amused by his question. And then it spoke. Because you looked. Zaid's breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at the figure before him. Its red eyes glowed in the dim light, piercing through the darkness like burning embers. The air around it felt colder, heavier, as though the night itself was bowing to its presence. Because I looked? Zaid echoed, his voice barely audible, trembling with a mix of fear and confusion. The figure chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down Zaid's spine. It was neither human nor beast but something ancient, something that thrived in the spaces where light dared not venture. "You humans," the figure said, its voice a deep, echoing rumble, "are always so curious. Always chasing what you do not understand. But curiosity comes at a price." Zaid's throat tightened as the weight of its words sank in. He glanced toward the car, the headlights now dimming as though the vehicle itself was succumbing to the darkness. The twisted shapes of the monstrous creatures lingered at the edge of the shadows, their glowing eyes watching intently, waiting for some unseen signal. "I didn't mean to disturb anything," Zaid stammered, his voice cracking. I just wanted to get home." The figure tilted its head, almost as if considering his plea. "Home," it repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "You think you can simply return to your world after stepping into ours? No, Zaid. Once the darkness claims you, it does not let go." Zaid felt his knees buckle, but he forced himself to remain standing. "Please," he whispered, desperation creeping into his voice. "There has to be a way out." The figure's lips curled into a sinister smile. "There is always a way, for those willing to pay the price." A flicker of hope ignited in Zaid's chest, but it was quickly tempered by the dread that had been his constant companion since the moment he stopped on this cursed road. What do you want?" he asked hesitantly. The figure stepped closer, its form becoming clearer in the faint light. Its features were an unsettling blend of human and beast, its limbs unnaturally long, its movements fluid yet menacing. "A bargain," it said simply. Zaid's heart pounded. "What kind of bargain?" The figure gestured to the monstrous creatures lurking in the shadows. "They were once like you," it said, its voice dripping with dark amusement. "Travelers who strayed too far, who dared to look into the eyes of the unknown. They are mine now, bound to this road for eternity. But you, Zaid, you intrigue me. I see something in you, a spark, a defiance. Perhaps you could be useful." Zaid swallowed hard. "Useful how?" The figure leaned in, its face mere inches from Zaid's. The stench of decay filled his nostrils, making him gag. "Bring me others," it whispered. "Lead them to this road, to this place. In return, I will let you go. You will have your freedom, for a time." Zaid's mind raced. The thought of condemning others to this nightmare was unbearable, but the alternative, to join the ranks of the cursed, to be trapped in this hellish limbo forever, was equally horrifying. Zaid hesitated, his voice trembling. "I can't do that. I can't condemn innocent people." The figure's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold indifference. "Then you leave me no choice." The creatures began to move, their twisted forms creeping closer, their growls rising in a symphony of terror. Zaid stumbled backward, his back pressing against the wrecked car. "Wait," he shouted, panic overtaking him. "I'll do it." The figure stopped, raising a hand to halt the advancing horde. Its smile returned, more menacing than ever. "Wise choice," it said. "But remember, Zaid, betray me, and you will suffer a fate far worse than theirs." Zaid nodded, his heart heavy with dread. He had made his choice, but at what cost? The figure stepped back into the shadows, its form dissolving into the darkness. The creatures followed, their glowing eyes fading one by one until Zaid was alone. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air became breathable again. Zaid collapsed to his knees, trembling as the reality of what he had done sank in. The road ahead was clear now, stretching out into the distance. The engine of his car sputtered to life, as if the dark forces had willed it to. Zaid climbed into the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheel. As he drove away, the faint sound of howls echoed behind him, a haunting reminder of the pact he had made. But as the first rays of dawn broke through the horizon, Zaid knew one thing for certain: the darkness wasn't done with him yet.